Next up, we've got a lightweight contest. Mateusz Gamrot, 24-2, taking on Dan the Hangman Hooker, 23-12. Let's talk about a couple of things here. We've got a Gamrot who is 7-2 in the UFC. He's finished 3 fights via knockout, but that's a little deceptive. Obviously, we had the leg injury against Rafael Fiziev and the submission due to strikes against Diego Ferreira, where he hurt him with a knee to the body, and then the Scott Holtzman knockout. So he's a guy that has a couple finishes under his belt, but really the one defining win in his UFC career was when he landed some good shots on Jeremy Stephens, took him to the ground, and almost ripped his arm off with that Kimura. That's Mateusz Gamrot. That's the gamer. That's the best thing that he's shown in the UFC. And I think that his fight against Rafael Adesanya showed what a tough, gritty guy he is, what a guy that really wants to win. Gamer, great nickname, right? He goes out there and puts it on the line. However, I had said that I thought Rafael dos Anjos would win the fight. I thought he would outperform his plus 300 price tag, and I thought he would land an intercepting knee and knock him out. And I mean, I know I didn't get it right, but I still think, a little tip of the hat to myself there on the analysis, right? You won't always get the picks right. You won't always get the bet right, but I think the analysis was pretty on point. I think a lot of Gamrot bettors were shitting their pants at some point in that fight when he looked like he was on skates, dancing around the octagon. But he's a tough guy, so he found a way to persevere. And the thing about Gamrot that's sensational is his wrestling. Guys, when he gets on top of people, they are stuck to the ground. And when they start to get back up, they get mat returned. He drops back down. He wrestles them again. He is a pretty relentless wrestler. He is a tough son of a gun to deal with. One of the only guys that dealt with his grappling was Beneil Dariush, right? And Beneil Dariush is extremely savvy in those positions. But that was about the only guy that could go out there and keep scrambling and rolling and keeping the pace moving. He's not the best positional control grappler you've ever seen, but he will just take you down over and over and over again. Do it all night long. Make it increasingly worse for you to get taken down. Land big shots as you stand up to your feet. He's just a guy that knows how to win fights, knows how to do things that look meaningful, that look impactful, that score points with the judges, that are eye-catching moments. And I think that there's a lot that you can learn from a guy like Mateusz Gamrot. But I also think on the other side, he's not getting an easy opponent here. He's got good striking. He's got good wrestling. He's got great jiu-jitsu as well. He's got all these great attributes. But he's got an opponent in Dan the Hangman Hooker who's had a ton of UFC experience, right? Vastly more than our guy Mateusz Gamrot. And he's one tier below, right? If you look, he's in the, let's say 6 to 20 in the division, right? And you're meanwhile looking at a guy who's really poised to be in that top 5, top 3 conversation in Mateusz Gamrot if he's able to go out there and keep stacking W's, right? And so when you look at Dan Hooker, he beat Jalen Turner. It's a very close split decision. He beat Claudio Puelles. That's not a great win. He lost to Arnold Allen. He shouldn't have been at 145. He lost to Islam Makhachev, and it was very similar to that fight that I just described for you about Mateusz Gamrot when he ripped off Jeremy Stephens' arm. That was exactly how it looked with Islam Makhachev ripping off the arm of Dan Hooker. Dan is such a tough bastard. He was about to let his whole shoulder get ripped apart. And thankfully the referee intervened at the right time there at an opportune moment. But then he beat Nasrat Haqparast, who I've always thought was criminally overrated and perennially pretty average, no disrespect. And then meanwhile, Michael Chandler, he loses that fight. He gets knocked out there. And Michael Chandler really hasn't had much success outside of that in the UFC. Then he loses to Dustin Poirier via a competitive decision. But I do think that was kind of a turning point in a lot of ways in his career, where, he basically got touched up so bad there and he took so much damage that since then he's been finished twice with strikes. And that really wasn't something that was happening to him with any kind of great frequency. He had been finished by Edson Barboza after a crazy accumulation before in the past. But I think that ultimately, what I'm seeing in Dan Hooker is a guy that is still going out there and fighting hard. He's still looking jacked when he shows up for the fights. He still can take a decent whooping at 155 and then try and come back on you in rounds 2 and 3. And he's not a terrible wrestler. His grappling is suspect. It leaves a little bit to be desired, but his wrestling itself is pretty good and he's got a good guillotine. I think ultimately, the things that I kind of lean towards in this fight would be a contrarian under right? And the reason I say that is because you have two guys that have been to decision in their recent fights, but we all saw Gamrot almost got knocked out in his most recent fight. Meanwhile, we know that when a guy like Islam Makhachev, right, a top-level guy, a guy with real grappling skill gets on top of Dan Hooker, he might be able to make him mince meat. He might be able to take care of him real quick. So I think that opens up possibilities for the under in this matchup. I think additionally, the things that I want to note about this kind of fight, let's pull up the UFC stats page so we make sure we're talking with facts and evidence at our disposal. So Mateusz Gamrot, he got knocked down by RDA, and he only outlanded him by 21 significant strikes, despite having 11 takedowns to 0. So he was all over him in terms of the functional positions, but he was not able to distance himself in the significant strike count by a huge margin. What he did do was he racked up total strikes, 111 to 39. So Mateusz Gamrot, when he's in top position, they're not all significant, but he's finding a way to score. He's finding a way to put points on the board. That's important. He went out there against Jalen Turner, got outlanded 29 to 40 on significant strikes. But once again, total strike saves him, 90 total strikes essentially to 62 for Jalen Turner. So you're just seeing a guy in Mateusz Gamrot who could go out there and find a way to win, even if the fight's close, against Arman Tsarukyan, one of the best wins you could have in the division. He achieved 6 out of 21 takedowns, an absolutely absurd volume of attempts. So I think that this guy really is a special fighter. He had 5 minutes of control against Tsarukyan, and beating a guy like RDA is a really impressive win. It is a staple win in your career. RDA is a tough son of a gun. He's gone out there and been tooth and nail with guys in the welterweight division. And I think that when you look at a guy like Gamrot, he's been dropped a number of times, right? And that's the thing that's really scary about him. So in his last few fights, let's just look at the data. Guram Kutateladze dropped him. He dropped Scott Holtzman. Arman Tsarukyan dropped him. Beneil Dariush dropped him. Jalen Turner dropped him. And RDA dropped him. That means he's been knocked down a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in the UFC and recorded just one knockdown in 9 fights. So he's had a lot of fights, and he is not putting up a great knockdown ratio. That's something that we want to be weary of for a guy like Gamrot. If he's not getting takedowns here, that could be a problem. Meanwhile, on the Dan Hooker side, he knocked down Jalen Turner in his last fight. He knocked down Claudio Puelles one fight prior to that. He got knocked down by Michael Chandler. He knocked down Al Iaquinta. He knocked down James Vick. He got knocked down by Edson Barboza. He had 2 knockdowns against Gilbert Burns and knocked him out. People forget that fight. He knocked down Jim Miller and finished him. He knocked down Ross Pearson. He knocked down Hatsu Hatsu Hioki. So, man, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 UFC knockdowns for Dan the Hangman Hooker. Like, this guy is a way more potent knockdown threat than a guy like Mateusz Gamrot, and he hasn't been knocked down as many times, and he's had more fights, and he's fought way bigger power punchers. So I think the durability edge goes to Dan Hooker on the feet. I think that for Dan Hooker, what he needs to do in this fight is land those intercepting knees. He needs to try and land a lot of, debilitating calf kicks. He needs to try and land with uppercuts, with big shots with his hands, get some respect, use of the jab to dictate. But let's look at the takedown numbers for Dan Hooker. He gave up 1 takedown to Jalen Turner, who's a pretty good wrestler and grappler. He gave up 1 to Islam Makhachev. The fight was over shortly thereafter. He had 3 takedowns to 0 against Nasrat Haqparast. He had 4 takedowns to 1 against Dustin Poirier, 1 takedown to 0 against Paul Felder. And he got taken down by Jim Miller. He had 2 takedowns to 0 against Mark Diakese and finished him. That was awesome. He got taken down 4 times by Jason Knight, twice by Yair Rodriguez, which is an awful look. Oh my God, that's a bad look. Got taken down twice by Hatsu Hioki. Got taken down 3 times by Maximo Blanco. So his takedown defense definitely suspect. Definitely something that has gotten better though, right? It hasn't really reared its ugly head in recent years. So let's see if somebody can go out there and dominate him in the wrestling and the grappling. We saw the only sub attempt of the fight was credited to Dan Hooker in the Jalen Turner fight, and he had more minutes of control because he stayed fresher throughout. So for me, I think that 888 hits the nail on the head. Gamrot is actually elite. I tend to agree. So I think the most likely outcome in this fight is Gamrot via submission. But I do think that when you're looking at paths for the other side, I think Gamrot, getting clipped on the chin is the most likely way that he loses this fight. So for me, it's Hooker by knockout. It's Gamrot by submission. That's kind of the way that I'm seeing this one. So I'm going to do my tape, my due diligence, see if anything comes away feeling different for me. But that's the way I'm seeing this one headed into this contest. And let's see what the odds are here. Do we have these ones on the board? Here we go. Mateusz Gamrot right now is sitting at a minus 330 over at Caesar Sportsbook. You're looking at a plus 280 comeback over on Bovada for Dan the Hangman Hooker. So I think that you're seeing a lot of really, bullish market prices on Mateusz Gamrot, but that's because even in a fight where he got hurt badly last time out, he found a way to stick to his wrestling pressure, stay with his top game, and get on top. And RDA is just a son of a gun, man. He's never going to quit. He's never going to give up on himself. And Dan Hooker, he didn't give up on himself against Islam Makhachev. He just was out of ideas and got caught in bad positions. That's very possible it happens here as well against a grappler the quality of Gamrot. Next up, folks, let's move to this next fight on the card, where we've got Tai Tuivasa taking on Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And I think that this is a fight where shout out to Luke Dillard in the comments says, what site do you use to compare best lines? This is a perfect time to plug my friends over at Fight Numbers. Guys, if you're looking to invest in your information regarding betting on MMA, there's a lot of different things that they offer. You can see in the tools, the article shows all the different things they offer. A lot of these features are free as well. So guys, go ahead and check these out. If you're interested in the site, the information's down in the description below, but you're asking how I get the best available prices. This is what I'm looking at, right? It's the odds board right in front of me, and I could toggle whether or not I want to see the best prices or whether I just want to see the odds board as a whole and see the different market available prices. And you're seeing everything from Bet Online and Pinnacle, very sharp sports books, to Bet365 and FanDuel, huge volume domestic sports books, and then a little bit more niche sports books like a BetMGM, like an ESPN Bet. So I think that it has a lot of value and it really helps me with my process. But I just wanted to shout that out. And I wanted to shout out to my guy, John Kelly, because there's a lot of people in the world doing business, but not a lot of them are veterans and, people that have been in the community for a long time doing content, a very positive public space in the community. Really respect what John Kelly has brought to the table, not only in terms of his skill in DFS and in MMA, but overall just as a human being. He's a good person. So I really have respected what I've seen from John in all his endeavors. And I've really appreciated this product he's built in terms of Fight Numbers. So shout out to Fight Numbers. And I appreciate them for the great information. I appreciate John Kelly for the product and the service. And if you guys got more questions or want more information, it's right down below.